Let's go ahead and spend a little time talking about selections inside of Flash CS4. Now, here I have 4 circles, and I wanted to spend some time talking about how to be able to get different portions of them depending on the drawing mode that you've used. Let me explain what I mean. Take a look here. I'm going to zoom in to this one circle that we have here. Now, if I select on the center portion of the circle, you'll notice that I only have the fill selected. Notice it over here. Now, if I single click on the outside, I only have the stroke. So how do I get both? This has a lot to do with whether or not you have this option selected over here down at the bottom called object drawing. Now, if you draw these without them, then they are separate sections. Notice I can click here and drag it out. So it was something that earlier versions of Flash did, and truthfully, I never really liked all that much. I think there were some problems with it. Now, if you wanted to select both stroke and fill, what you'd have to do is you'd have to double click. Having a double click, now you can modify, move, or change both of them. But it got a little bit more complex as well. Take a look. I could inadvertently click and drag a portion of this area, and I would only select a portion of it. See? And drag it out, and now I've only taken a section of it. So if I wanted to highlight the whole thing, I'd have to make sure that I dragged across everything. You couldn't just do like in Illustrator where you could just drag across, take a section, and then move it out. Didn't really work that way. Looks cool, but I kind of wanted to work a little bit better than that. So whenever you have something that isn't in object drawing mode, what you can do is you can single click on the center to select the fill. You can double click to select the fill and the stroke, or you can select on the outside of it so that you can go ahead and select the stroke by itself. Sometimes you might have to double click to get the entire path of something. So it's something that you want to keep in mind. Now, this has a lot to do with the fact that we didn't use object drawing mode. Let me explain that. I'm going to highlight all of these and I'm going to move these guys up here. And I'm going to go ahead and select my circle tool. And this time I'm going to make sure object drawing is turned on. Now, if I click and drag, there's a box that appears around the object. Now, if I use my selection tool and I move it around, I can move the whole thing. So this is treated as a drawing object. Note it over here. Now, what about all of the clicking and the dragging to be able to select a portion of it? You can still do it. It just requires you to double click inside of it. Notice that now we were in scene 1 and we've drilled into the drawing object. Now it behaves just like it did before. You could just select a section of it, move it out of the way, select the center for a fill, double click to select the fill and the stroke, and you're editing right on the stage. Once you're done with everything, you can go ahead and jump back out to scene 1, and now you can move the object as a whole. So that's kind of a benefit. That's a plus that they've added to this, and something that I think that's really, really good. Now let's go ahead and talk about erasers. I'm just going to go ahead and single click on this, and then I'm going to delete it. I'll drag these guys down to the center. Let's go ahead and deselect the canvas, and I'll go ahead and select my eraser tool. The eraser tool is going to let me erase portions of the objects that I've drawn. Now, you have to be very careful because there is a specific mode that you need to use when you're erasing objects. Notice here's the mode down on the left, and directly under this you have a section where you can specify the shape of your eraser. Let's go ahead and talk about the modes. I'm going to click on the drop down for the mode, and I'm going to click on Erase Normal. Take a look. It erases normal. Pretty straightforward, just like you would expect any eraser to work. I'm going to go ahead and hit the undo, and what we'll do is we'll move into Erase Fills. What do you think that's going to do? I'm going to erase, 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 and I'm going to let go of the mouse. It gets rid of just in things on the canvas that are fills. If I want, I'm going to go ahead and select Erase Lines. Let's go ahead and erase, erase, erase. What happens? It gets rid of only the lines. I'm going to go ahead and do an undo. Let's go to the last one here. Erase selected fills. I'm going to erase, erase, erase. And once I let it go, nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen? Well, I didn't have any fills selected, so single click, hold down the shift key, single click, some fills, and now watch. If I come over here and I erase, only the ones that I have selected were erased. So erasing is pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about transforming and moving stuff around. Take a look. I'm going to double click on this guy and I'm going to move him over here. And I'm going to double click on this guy and I'm going to drag him over. Now you'll notice that automatically you start getting something called a smart guide. As you're moving around, these lines appear that allow you to be able to line up objects a little bit faster. In the days of yore, you would have to grab separate components and you would have to use the align panel to be able to do stuff. I find that in Dreamweaver CS4, this is a welcome addition because it lets you kind of center stuff and align stuff a little bit better. So I'm happy about that. Now what you have to do is come into a specific area, you let it go, and now you're aligned. If you wanted to transform something, what you'd have to do is you'd have to highlight it and use the free transform tool, keyboard shortcut Q. If you click on that, you'll get a series of transformation handles, and it works a lot like Photoshop if you're familiar with Photoshop. If you drag on the sides, it goes and resizes this horizontally. If you drag from these sides, it resizes vertically. If you drag from a corner, it'll go ahead and resize horizontally and vertically. You can add the shift key as a modifier to be able to constrain the proportion of what you're doing. And you can also move just outside of the transformation handles and drag, which will rotate your image. Once you have it exactly where you would want it, you can go ahead and switch back to your selection tool and you're good to go. If you wanted to group these two, you can just drag and highlight and modify. From here, you can go ahead and do a Command G for group. You can also ungroup by doing a Shift Command G, or Shift Control G, or Control G. So that'll deal with your transformation, that'll deal with your groupings, and for the most part, it's a good way for you to be able to create some objects inside of Flash. However, one of the things that I find is that a lot of the objects that you work with in Flash are created somewhere else. So let's talk about how to be able to import objects from somewhere else. I'll highlight these and I'm going to head and delete them. I'm going to click on File and I'm going to click on Import and I'm going to import to the stage. At the stage, I'm going to go to the folder that you downloaded from the download section and I'm going to select Car and I'm going to click on Import. Once I click on Import, that's going to show me a dialog box and it's going to tell me, all right, well, this was created inside of Illustrator. I'll show you. I'm going to go to Illustrator and inside of Illustrator, I'll do a File, Open. I'm going to navigate to the desktop directory and I'm going to go to my selections and I'll go to Car and I'll click on Open here. So there's our car. Now this was created inside of Illustrator. So I'm going to close this and I'm going to minimize Illustrator and I'll go into Flash and take a look at what it says here. It starts with the layer and it starts with all of the different groups and says, all right, well, what do you want to be able to do with this object? How do you want to bring it into Flash? Now, notice that you can also import by specific artboards. Right? Illustrator CS4 supports multiple artboards, so you can select the artboard that you want to start working with here. I happen to think that that's really cool. Now, what do I want to do? I want to take all of these layers, everything that the car is in, and I want to turn it into not flash layers, but a single flash layer. You also have the option here to be able to take the stage and set it to the same proportions of the Illustrator artboard. I don't want to do that. I want to be able to keep my stage exactly where I have it. So I'm going to leave that unchecked, and I don't want to import unused symbols. So I'll go ahead and I'll click OK. And what I like about Flash CS4 and Illustrator CS4 is the fidelity between the two. Notice I can zoom in here and it's sharp. It looks exactly the way that it did in Illustrator. That's a big plus because now I have something inside of my stage and I don't have to necessarily use the tools in Flash to draw them. If I'm more comfortable inside of Illustrator, I'm going to go ahead and draw there. Then I'm just going to save all my components and I can import them into Flash to be able to do any kind of editing or tweening that I would want to do later. I think that that's the preferred method of working, and for the most part, you're going to be drawing in another application. Flash has got some great tools to be able to draw, but it's not a drawing app per se. Use Illustrator, merge it with Flash, and you'll be good.